Thank you, folks. Sounds like you enjoyed. Thank you so much for being here. I was just noting outside that this is the 2-year anniversary of our last screening before the pandemic, which was also a Netflix screening. It was Unorthodox, for those of you who've seen the show. I'm really honored to introduce the editors of this film, the Academy Award nominated editors, Andrew Weisblum. Andrew, thank you so much for being here. And live via magic, we have Myron Kerstein with us. Oh, there we go. Myron, can you hear us? You're on mute.
So typical. Yes, I can hear you.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you both for being here. Thank you for a fabulous film. You're both extremely accomplished editors who have worked on many of my favorite films. How was this experience? Unique, different?
Apart from the obvious pandemic, which happened, we started shooting 8 days before everything shut down. So it was a strange interruption for us, but that definitely changed the process in several different ways. So that was in March or what have you, I guess, was when we shut down, and then we resumed again in October after a lot of careful planning at Netflix to try and keep everybody safe, figure out how to do it, and it fed into things creatively. You know, one of the challenges initially was trying to recreate 1988 to 1992 New York now, with a lot of things that are gone, like not just the Moondance Diner, but a lot of locations, and Times Square in particular, and trying to recreate all that. So we were attempting to shoot a lot of things on location and dress them or disguise them in different ways. And then when the pandemic happened and we realized we couldn't do as much in public, it became more of a studio movie where we were doing everything at Steiner stages, recreating a lot of locations there. So in some ways it made things simpler to recreate because it was from scratch, but Alex DiGirlando, our production designer, did a great job on that.
They think the pandemic would actually allow you to have access to Times Square, take down jumbotrons, and
well, the one thing it did give us access to was New York Theater Workshop, where Jonathan Larson originally did Tick Tick Boom and Rent. Originally, we didn't have access to that, but when we came back, of course, theater was completely shut down. So that theater was sadly and fortuitously available to us, as well as a lot of the theater community who wanted to participate.
For sure. Myron, did you want to add to that?
Well, I had just finished a pretty big musical called In the Heights. So making musicals was pretty familiar for me, but I had done it with a giant crew in New York in Chelsea. And this time around, I was asked to fly across country in the middle of a pandemic away from my family and basically live with Lynn and cut the movie at his house. And the rest of my crew was basically in their little apartments or houses or VFX producers in London. So it was a much different experience in that way, trying to make, a musical is pretty complicated. So to have everybody all over the city or all over the world, and then at the same time working with Lynn, who was writing Encanto downstairs while we cut Jonathan Larson upstairs. So that was very unique for sure.
I was going to ask, you're working with a first-time director who knows if his career is going anywhere, and it's nice that you took a chance on this director. But actually, I'm sure with all of your experience, how did that work out? This is Lin-Manuel Miranda's first time actually directing a film, did you feel that this meant that he had to rely on you more? On how was that interaction?
Well, he's a first time director, but it sure didn't feel like it. I mean, he's everything you want in a director in terms of collaborative and inspirational to everybody who's around to participate, and also very decisive and clear about what he wants. And he knows what he knows and what he doesn't know, and was very open about asking questions about the process. And then you could see the gears turning in him immediately understanding the analogies between what he had done in the theater and what we do in film, and how those different processes compare, whether it's test screenings or the mix, or even just the editorial process being a writing process, like a songwriting process, that he was able to understand what was possible in the room as like a workshop, essentially, for a play. That was different for a first-time director. You never get anything like that, where you just learned there was no learning curve at all.
And had, of course, been involved with the industry in so many ways. That
Of course, I
this
mean,
is not a first-time
he wasn't a
director.
novice, but there's always the things with certain kind of, with a first-time director, there's kind of a range of issues that you encounter, whether it's being particularly precious about something and not really wanting to give up, or give up is the wrong term, but adapt to the circumstances that require you to rethink and rewrite on your toes to keep the movie working. He was totally open.
I think, I think first-time directors can often be pretty precious about almost everything. And Lynn wasn't. It was completely the opposite. Couldn't be a better collaborator, and just, trying to ask us what we can bring to the film. And a film that this is, it's as complicated as it is, with memory and intercutting and time, just to be allowed to play without somebody being, why did you try that? Well, I'm just trying to explore, the grammar of this thing. And as Andy had said, oftentimes with a first-time director, the preview and screening process can be really daunting when you're screening for an audience for the first time, because there's always problems. And but he saw it as like the previews of a Broadway show. It's like, oh, okay, now we'll tinker, and we'll rewrite that in the edit room somehow, and work on the pace, etc. So he was just, you couldn't have a better first-time director, that's for sure.
So I love that. I love those moments that are completely reworked in the editing. Do you have a good example of like one of those moments that you love that was like, it started there and then you had to completely turn it around?
Well, the first half of the film probably went through the most changes, because one of the main questions of the film is, you want the film to work as well with the people who are familiar with Jonathan Larson and who were around at the time, and the people who don't know anything about him. So you have that whole kind of context exposition problem that you have to get through. At its core, all that stuff is obviously important in a bigger sense, the theater world and everything. But in terms of telling the story and making it universal and what the film was about pursuing your dreams, and finding your moment, whether you run out of time or give up on it, and all those kinds of ideas that are universal. Who Jonathan Larson was and what he represents in theater and what Rent became was not necessarily critical to the heart of the film, the emotion of the film. So it was a challenge to make sure all that stuff was in there without bogging the pace of the film down. So there was a lot of experimentation with the first half of the film, and using our structural devices of intercutting that was partially scripted, but we took it a lot further in terms of hopping around between the different time periods that we were in, using the stage to bridge things, and combining bursts of exposition in there in 3090 and elsewhere in the movie in the front half, so that we could keep it moving. But also the way the film opens and closes is pretty different than was originally scripted. Archival footage became a major ingredient for us in a way that was suggested in the script, but not to the extent that we ended up using it because it's such an easy shorthand.
Yeah, I would say that I probably spent 5 months working on 3090, just reworking it and tearing it apart and putting it back together and trying to find a frame with the archival footage. With the voiceover didn't exist before, and then we grabbed some pickup shots to just have a slice of life of Jonathan with Susan in the diner, and more introductions to to his friends. All that was just a long process of working with Levinson and Lynn in the edit room and just exploring, using footage in a different way. There's this, but a lot of that was from Andy experimenting with archival footage in the body of the film, and then us pulling it out there and then being inspired by that and then trying it in a different way as a bookend. There's things like Jonathan pulling the cover off the piano at the end of the film, which is a shot that I stole from Y, but I thought it might have a lot of resonance towards the end of the film. And that's the kind of stuff that you're just like, it just kind of comes out of nowhere. And the nowhere that this came from was I actually tried to do that at the beginning of the film, and then we're like, well, we need something here. Let's experiment with it in a different context. And anyways, there's thousands of those decisions that you're making over the course of the film, and this particular film gave us a lot of permission to experiment.
So I was curious. You have in this film so many sources that you mentioned that you're working with. There's the live performance. There's the there's the narrative that the kind of the main thread of the story. There's often other little pieces that come in, if it's home videos or dreams, imaginary moments. So my big question is, was the whole performance there and you were able to choose where to pick from, or were very specific moments shot for that final edit, and you had obviously some flexibility of where to go back and forth? How much of the other footage were you able to choose from?
You mean by the whole performance? You mean by the theater stuff?
The theater stuff.
Yeah, I mean that was shot pretty as its own complete thing, pretty extensively. I mean, there were certain kind of narration pieces that were just inserts, basically, to bridge from one to the other. But then there were some other ones that were picked up later on to kind of help us. But we knew that we always had this thread, this bridge, that the film is basically a concert performance with a monologue. So in terms of the structure and breaking into song and all those things, like all those questions are kind of dealt with right away because you have this framework, and you could always kind of touch home base by going back to the stage one way or another, either musically or as a narrator or whatever else. It was an anchor for everything. But that was shot pretty completely. The rest of the stuff was obviously pretty isolated and specific for budgetary reasons, and also for logistic reasons because of shooting in a pandemic and stuff, that we had to be really careful about that stuff. One of the things that was interesting about this process and how it changed it, that Lynn was very concerned with making sure the films felt very spontaneous and alive, and that was a tone that was part of the energy of the film and not over crafted and manipulated, that it felt captured. Which is one thing to say when there's no pandemic, and another when you have to have everybody masked around the camera and only certain zones of actors together and all that kind of stuff. It was much different logistical challenges because of that.
Yeah, and back to like 3090, for example, Lynn just loved this idea of this Betacam footage, and so having that texture to be able to cut to at any given point, we had that option. But we just ended up just wanting to use it in a more limited way, just to start the film with the monologue in that way. But we had the option to go to this texture if we wanted it, and then in other places, we literally created, you know, the Betacam through visual effects, etc.
One of the things about the Betacam footage I think that he liked is that it had an immediate authenticity to it, because it reminded him of all the research material which we were looking at, which is the real Jonathan, the real space, and all their home movies and stuff. And then it became clear that we could either actually use that or recreate it, and it kind of resonated with the authenticity of what we were trying to do.
And I've seen now on the internet all these like people who have like cut from the original footage into the film's footage to kind of like make those comparisons. And of course, Andrew Garfield does a fabulous job in those moments and having those comparisons there.
He does an amazing job of capturing the spirit of his performance and energy, which is a little goofy sometimes and a little, you know, big, but it's not an imitation. You know, it's heartfelt.
And he's there. I mean, he's carrying this whole thing. It's definitely a lot of Andrew, and I think he's in character the entire time. I want to ask one. I have a lot more to ask, but I want to give an opportunity for the audience to ask some questions. So I'll ask one last question to get them ready. There's a clock ticking. Tick, tick, boom. There's a beat throughout it. It's a fast beat too. It's, you know, it's Lin-Manuel Miranda's running out of time, and this is something that you feel throughout the entire movie. How is that affecting in your process as far as creating that atmosphere?
Well, that's something that was a literal device, obviously, that was shot. There was a lot of that shot, different moments of looking at clocks and ticking and so on and so forth. And I think we found less was more with that. I think you get the idea pretty quickly, what that he's running out of time. But it was certainly a nice device to be able to use to kind of ratchet up his anxiety when necessary.
Yeah, and then use it sparingly to like almost like the air coming out of a balloon. I love after therapy, he's back on the subway, you know, trying to get back to it, you know, get back to writing his song after this big fight, and then you just slightly hear that ticking coming back, and so just using it sparingly, but just reminding us that you know. The deadline's approaching. It's, you know, it's always in his mind that he's about to turn 30, and not get too gratuitous at the same time.
Works well. I'd love to take some questions from the audience. We have a microphone. I thought we had a microphone. If not, we will use mine. Here we go. Let me pass it around.
Hi, my name is Allie, and I'm a sound designer or aspiring sound designer. So first of all, I love the ticking, like how the ticking sound is used. So I'm really glad that was the last question. But I was actually wondering how you both feel about the categories that the Academy is not including in the live broadcast this year, because I feel like I was very, very disappointed to hear that. And obviously editing and sound are two of those that aren't being broadcast.
Yeah, you know, it's a complicated issue, and it isn't. I think that you know, the Academy is facing some challenges. I'm not really sure how this decision addresses that for them. Maybe they're smarter than me, but ultimately I feel that, you know, there is a mission for the Academy, which is to basically uphold and promote the arts and sciences of filmmaking, which is what that's about. And I know they have their financial considerations too. They are going to have to find a better balance.
Right here.
Hi, Andy. Mark, we've met before.
Hi, Mark. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. And Myron, nice to meet you. My question was really around, obviously working on a film, working as an editor on a film is a giant task and a monumental task in and of itself. But how do two editors work together and hand off tasks? In this case, with this film.
Well, I've worked on films where I've worked in tandem with several editors, and that's a specific process. And often that, the different multiple editors are brought in for myriads of reasons, whether it's side tasks or volume of work, whatever. In this particular case, because of our schedule extension with the pandemic, I had to leave at a certain point because I had an obligation, and the film had been going on for a year. So that's when, Myron quite obviously came up as a perfect candidate to help pass the baton to, and obviously did a bang up job. So we stayed in communication. Yes. We stayed in communication in the handoff, and he can talk about his side of it. But, it was my feeling was the fair thing to the movie was it actually happened at kind of a really great time, which is right when the director's cut was finished and we started to have our first screenings. So, Lynn and I had spent months talking about what audiences might have as a reaction without actually having that data. So when that comes in, it's kind of the perfect time for another collaborator to also be fresh to that process, but still be in sync with what our parameters are. But Myron, you should.
Yeah, I think that I think no, you said it perfectly, Andy. I think my job was to download Andy and Lynn as quickly as possible and get to know the project. And then I had questions about what was working and not working for the film. And now I just needed validation from an audience and other people who could, in the inner circle to sort of join in and then start solving problems. But I have to say that I've worked with many editors on co-editing teams, and I've never felt more in sync with another editor's style and approach to filmmaking, even though we weren't in the same edit suite together. It was quite an inspiring process to just be inspired and keep pushing the the film. And when they say pencils down, that's when we stop. And it was just a really incredible process.
Let me just follow up. How far along were you when you had to pass the baton?
Well, it was the end of the director's cut. So I don't remember when it was. It was like March or something, right? I don't remember exactly.
Yeah, and
But
just to put it in perspective, like that is generally the place where usually no one ever sees a film until the director's cut, unless you have a director who's, I don't know. Anyways, but also the pandemic just really prevented us to really screen for the while. So it took I was on it for another 8 months after that, reworking the movie.
A few more questions over here.
Hi, I'm Emily. First of all, congratulations on the nomination. It's incredibly well deserved. And I think
Thank
you
you.
both did a brilliant job editing the film. I've watched it too many times now, and I seem to notice something new every single time. So congratulations. I think you touched on this briefly when you mentioned how it has a unique framework where you have the rock concert. And so you can kind of touch back on that, and that gets rid of some of the initial questions you might have when you're working on like a musical theater film. I guess generally, I was wondering what some of the challenges might be, or perhaps joys as well, when working on a musical theater film in comparison to a non-musical film.
Well, the thing that was interesting about this one in particular, I mean, I've worked on other musical projects like that, but they were pretty straightforward. But in this case, what I came to realize was that because of our framework, the real dynamic in the film was not about, you know, in many musicals, they'll have certain kind of grammatical rules about how the musical numbers work in contrast with the dialogue scenes, and how you get from one to the other and what the pacing is between the two. But in this film, it felt like the dynamic really was that every number had a different rule to it, whether it was intercutting with the stage or not at all, or singing on camera or not at all. Every time there was some different ingredient kind of, you know, you set the stage, you set the rules at 30-90 and you keep breaking them. And that's what keeps it interesting. In terms of editing a musical, I mean, there are certain things that are exactly the same in terms of just making sure you're always telling a story and conveying character and emotion and tracking with your main characters, which in a musical, you have to make sure that the music numbers are not just performances, but also telling a story, so that by the time the song is over, the film has moved forward another step and you learn or feel something new. So that's an important part of the musical. But then you have these other challenges of, you can, in a normal film that's pretty modular, you can kind of condense and expand the dialogue as much as you want and the scenes and the action. But once you hit a song, you've hit a kind of a pace wall, basically, where you've got this 4/4 grid or whatever it is that you've got to stay in for 3 minutes or 4 minutes, and you have to figure out how to pace the movie around that stuff. In this, we would take songs and rip them apart and rearrange them sometimes too, for just that reason. Therapy is a strong example of that had to keep collapsing and collapsing till it's kind of the right scale for the movie. Myron, did I leave anything out there?
Well, it's also just trying to keep it grounded. You know, a majority of these numbers were done by, you know, with playback and lip sync. And so Andy and I are both meticulously working with our music editors to slip, you know, hundreds and hundreds of edits, you know, just to make it feels like a real rock concert performance. And that is, you know, you're supposed to not think about any of that, of course. You're supposed to just slip right into it. So that's very unique challenge with a musical that, you know, just is what it is. But I would agree with Andy. Like, I like to approach every film the same way, as far as performance, and look at things, whether they make me want to cry or laugh, or the goosebumps stand on my neck. Those are the things that I usually take notice and try to fit in the film. And then, and it's no different with a musical.
Last question up there. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Heather. Thanks so much for being here, and the film is really great, and congratulations as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My question was about the swimming pool scene. I thought that was really cool how you saw him come to that revelation about the song at the end. I think earlier in the film, there was a clip of the pool, and I was wondering if it was always the plan to have like a glimpse of that earlier on and then go back to it, or if that was added later, and how that came about.
Well, there was an early reference to the fact that in order to relax and clear his head, he'd go swim laps at this pool, which, by the way, is the same pool that Jonathan used to swim in every time. And it has these lanes on the floor of the pool that look coincidentally like bars of music, which works pretty well for the idea. But that was, it had a little bit more exposition to it, like just that explanation, but I don't think it didn't really need it. We expanded it a bit to explain it more clearly, and Myron ripped it out, rightly so, because who needs that? It's a pool, he swims in it, that's enough. But the sequence itself, one of the endless discussions I had with Alice, our wonderful cinematographer, was, okay, we're gonna have this 3-minute song with no singing on camera of a guy swimming laps. So what are we watching? And what are those shots gonna be, and how do we build it into something that's actually progressive and has some energy to it? So we knew we needed enough shots, and I knew they had to be short because I had worked with stuff in shooting in water, which is not a lot of fun. But little did we know that I think Andrew's mother or something was a swimming instructor. So he hopped in the pool and, you know, he could hold his breath underwater for 2 minutes and was nothing. So we had way more footage than we ever needed. You know, made me look a little like an idiot, yelling and screaming, we need to have more shot lists. We need to have more shots. But he pulled it all off. There was a little more to that number than what's actually in there. With the girl by the side of the pool reminding him of Susan and inspiring his as his muse, basically. It just kind of lingered a little too much staring at this girl that we don't know. Just felt a little, in her bathing suit, felt a little awkward. It probably works in a, you know, a one-man show on a stage, but not acted out.
That being a little creepy. Myron, did you want to add to that?
No, I just wanted, well, the one other thing I would just add about, you know, originally there was that monologue with the pool that Andy, you know, said that I ripped out, and I wasn't sure if I should rip it out, to be honest with you, but it just seemed more organic for him not to be talking about too many things and keep it more to, you know, him trying to write Superbia, etc. But it's funny because the producers, when I put those shots, literally repeating a couple of shots from swimming at the beginning, they're like, "You can't do that. You're not allowed to do that." So it's like, well, why not? I want to establish a routine, and I love the idea of you know, mirroring things in that way, and that is a lot of that playfulness that we were talking about and that we found in the edit.
There's so much more to say. We haven't even talked about what was left on the editing floor. This is really a fabulous film, and I wish you both so much luck with this. I know you have another Q&A now where you're going to switch roles. The live
Yeah,
virtual.
it's in LA, so I
you have
get
to put on your Zoom outfit.
Yeah, I got to put on my.
Thank you so much. Folks, thank you. Thank you for being a part of this. Please join us for more screenings. Please tell your friends about this fabulous film, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you.